It's Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday, we're talking about are women more protected by society? Now, by society, that's a hard one to define at first, but I have been hearing this come up a lot lately again, that women are protected and have no idea what it's like to be thrown into the bad, cruel world and have to fend for themselves. And the interesting thing is that the data doesn't show this. No matter where you look in terms of, statistics, whether it's the UK, whether it's the US, whether it's Canada, I check these. The rates are fairly consistent from country to country. Now, I'm leaving out places like Kenya, like I talked about on Friday, where femicide is like a larger problem. I'm sticking mostly to the West. Not doing like infanticide or sex selective abortion or anything like that. So that's even going to tilt things, it's going to tilt things in a certain way. But I think that's important because the people who are talking about this, they tend to be middle class or higher. And it tends to be this sort of amorphous, not really defining society, not really defining protection. It's just kind of a vibe. So, let's get into it. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Now, the place we usually start with this is the fact that significantly more murders are committed against men than women. And the interesting thing about that is, one, they're more likely to involve guns. Two, they are more likely to be committed outside the home. But the prevalence of stranger murder is rare for both. It is more likely for men than women, but neither of these numbers are very big. The big difference in homicide rates is that women are much, much, much more likely to be killed by a romantic partner, either a spouse or a boyfriend, that is male. Whereas men tend to be killed by non-family acquaintances, friends, stuff like that. It's not family members. That's not true for boys. So this is adult men. Boyhood, it's different. That's most often a family member. But adult men are much more likely to be killed by someone they know, but not someone in their household or family member. So, and this makes the whole thing of, are the streets safe, very complicated. And people like to point to very high profile cases, like, what was it, the Sarah Everhart? Is that Everard? I think her name was. That case where she was killed by a cop. That was awful. But this idea that there is these social protections for women that, aren't available for men. It's not as clear cut as that. And people start looking at like women's mentorship programs and women's leadership programs and women's only this and women's only that, missing the fact that that was a reaction to the fact that these spaces were originally for men. And there is still masculinized workplace environments. And I've read some interesting papers on this that, see, more and more I think that these women's programs, well, they're not working terribly well, one. But also, if there's still sort of a man vibe at work, then of course it's going to disadvantage typical women. And we know that, in terms of success metrics, again, they're all over the place. Girls are doing better in school than boys, but boys still make more money than women. And that's because men are overrepresented at the very top and at the very bottom. And so when we get into this protected thing, I said on Friday, it's more like control. And it really is that men are expected to, embody certain ideal characteristics. And those make men more competitive, tougher, all that stuff. But, to the detriment of the softer, more emotional things. And I mean, again, that's boyhood. Again, where that happens. We really, really need to start taking a good hard look at the assumptions we make about boys and girls. I'm always taken aback, especially with young Black men, when I'm working with, a guy between the ages of 20 and 30, and I try to find, other Black men or Black leaders for them to talk to. I'm struck by how many of them, I'm going to be really rough on them. You can't coddle these boys. And so I don't go in that direction because, what I see talking to these young men is they need that emotional security. They need that person who thinks they can do it and that they can talk to about, more vulnerable stuff, because that's where you get that stable core that allows you to do like the long-term things and stick to it and all that stuff. And I mean, I think the reason that there are so many men at the, the bottom of the success pyramid is, because of things like mass incarceration and whatnot. And, the law and order paradigm really hasn't been great for men at all. Addictions. Men are more likely to self-report better levels of happiness and mental health than women. But then we've got more addiction, accidental death, and suicide with men, completed suicides in men. So the data's all over the place. And this is why I say, what do we mean by society? And what do we mean by protection? And I do think it's interesting, men are more likely to, be killed outside the home. And part of that is, that in commission of a crime statistic, unfortunately, and it's guns. But the public space has traditionally been seen to be male. Women are supposed to stay home where it's safe. That's the argument, right? Except for women, the least safe place is a woman's home. And obviously, poverty and other factors intersect with that. But, this thing about, stay out of the public spaces. Don't go out at night, ladies. That hasn't really protected women. What it's done is boxed them in to make, abuse by those who abuse easier and more complete. Domestic violence shelters don't prevent domestic violence. It may shorten the how long a woman's stuck in it. It gives her a place to go once her husband has been violent. It doesn't prevent the violence in the first place. And the fact that the more and more and more we build, they keep filling up. We're not effectively tackling this problem. So there's a lot of lip service given to women and girls, women and girls, women and girls, but the numbers aren't budging. Now, are the numbers for men increasing? Yes. I mean, now that we've got domestic violence shelters for men with families, they're filling up too. So we would expect to see numbers shifting with more gender equality. And this is, not to say that if any man has been abused by a woman in the home, in a romantic relationship, that it's not real. It's just comparatively rare compared to women. The biggest abusers of men are other men. And I do think that there's something in the fact that we don't encourage boys to protect themselves, because that's really what keep your legs closed and your mouth shut, and stay out of the way, stay as small as possible, so that you don't get raped. That's what's taught to women in a way that's not taught to men. And is that protecting women, or is that telling women that they have a responsibility to protect themselves? Because again, like I said, the minute you're like, well, no, I don't want to just sit here and be inert. I want to get out there. Well, then there's you brought this on yourself attitude. And this is where benevolent sexism comes into the mix, and why I think it's very, very important to talk about this regarding the protection of women. Because people who hold benevolently sexist attitudes like, oh, women are angels, women should be put up on pedestals, women are more moral than men, women are nice and kind, right? They are more likely to blame a woman if she gets assaulted because, oh, you must have done something wrong. You were a slut. You violated feminine modesty norms, and therefore no protection for you, right? And there are similar elements in men, but there is not that stay out of the public, stay small and quiet for your own protection. And that's where I think the disconnect is. Because the fact that the protection of women is rooted in profoundly benevolently sexist attitudes, and any woman who defies the programming doesn't, she loses all of that. It's more likely, well, she brought it on herself. That indicates that it is not actually protecting women. It's protecting the gender stereotypes associated with women. If you behave a certain way, it matters. And that's wife and mom, right? If you do not behave in the proper woman ways, well, then you have the femme fatale trope from the old pulps, who in those old stories, the femme fatale was usually killed, or frequently killed, sometimes arrested by her, mob boss boyfriend or something like that. It was very much a cautionary tale to be a good girl. This is what the protections are. And this is why women, if you guys have said to me, they don't understand why women get so offended when they say this. It's just fact. That's why women get bothered by these comments. Because, first of all, the social cruelties that women inflict on each other are brutal. Like brutal. And there's so there's that. There isn't emotional protection in single sex spaces. There isn't. And there's an argument to be made. Well, if women have to be protected from the bad men, who's protecting men from the bad men? And that is a fair statement if you buy the argument that single sex spaces are for protection. The data doesn't bear that out. And we have co-ed bathrooms all over the place here in Canada. They're single stalls. They're fine, right? The idea of communal change rooms is a very, very old one. We don't need them anymore. And the idea that a woman is just unsafe in a common area, especially in the age of video cameras. There was a police bulletin put out about someone wanted for a bathroom sexual assault. Excuse me. And I'm like, oh, let's look into this. Like, cause this is, turf paradise right here. And, reading between the lines, it was very clear that a man had been assaulted in that bathroom. And there was security footage of the guy who did it. And so that guy's probably gotten caught by now. And that's the thing with so many cameras around and so much surveillance and busy spaces. It's fairly safe for everyone as a rule. The violence against men happens in specific instances, and that's not to downplay it. I mean, I don't like the idea that there's a shame in men that they won't report when they've been, when they've been battered, right? They just don't report the crime. And, sometimes cops are dicks about it, but the troubles in policing are, we know about that. But often, it's the intersection of being a man while poor and the unsafe situations that get put into with that, just because, society gives less and less of a shit about the poor for all the left-wing flag waving, right? The poverty reduction has really taken a nosedive in terms of interest. Now, part of that is because, unfortunately, Black Lives Matter shit the bed. And that really sucks because that was important. See also Me Too. But this idea that single-sex spaces protect, they don't, because the strongest risk to a woman is in her own home. The violence just moves. And unlike, if somebody punches, I remember when I went to the police, oh boy, that was awful, about Stalker Chan. The sergeant I spoke to, because the investigating officer, who was a woman, screamed at me so loudly my husband could hear her on the other end of the phone across the room. But I asked the sergeant, who of course I called, but he talks to the cop before he talks to me. And I said, look, I don't want to waste your time. What do I have to do to bring this back to you? And the guy said, well, if she walked up to you in a room full of people and punched you in the face, that would be great. I said, are you seriously saying an assault would be great? But from a police perspective, there's witnesses, right? There's evidence. And so if a guy hauls off and punches another guy in somewhere, people see it, there's no doubt what happened. Whereas when it's these, the reason domestic abuse is so, on every level is it tends to be kind of a he said, she said, and there tend to not be many, clear facts, unless it's like, Rihanna getting beaten black and blue. And I mean, there's an example. My God, Rihanna, famous, beautiful woman, got pummeled by Chris Brown. And he still has a career, like that. Nobody really protected Rihanna. And that, look at look at the women Diddy abused. And we can say he beat his girlfriends because he admitted to it in court because he wasn't on trial for that. Were those women protected? And well, they put themselves at sea. See? So we do have, and what I think is really going on here is that because we don't nurture our boys and we give them this very dog eat dog view of the world, there's emotional needs that aren't met. They may not even really know what they are, and they walk around feeling lonely and afraid a lot of the time. And so this idea of, wow, it would be really nice to just be a stay-at-home parent. And, guys will say this to me and I say, well, do you want kids? Well, not really. It's like, well, why the envy then? Like it's just sort of the what if brain going. And I do think it speaks to the loneliness, the lack of overall support. Even guys with friends don't really open up to friends. I ask, like, sort of, when you talk to your friends, do you feel like they support you? And they say, yes, I think, they support me. But when I try to bring up my feelings, they sort of rapidly change the subject. And that's something we can do something about, but that has nothing to do with protecting men and boys. That's about nurturing men and boys. And we know there's an issue there. Like, this is the thing. Instead of constantly fighting over these distractions, we know that that's something that needs to be improved. And if, boys have better emotional supports, boys are taught a greater emotional language, then they'll probably do better in school. We probably won't have quite so many boys at the bottom. Now, will we have quite as many men at the top? Probably not either, because the hyper competitiveness will take a bit of a drop. But I think overall, that's okay, right? We'd rather have more men doing reasonably to moderately well than, all these men at the bottom. And I mean, the other thing we really have to look at is workplace cultures and mass incarceration, but definitely workplace culture. I mean, I see guys get absolutely worked to the bone and they don't set boundaries because they're afraid they're going to get fired. And that feels very helpless. Now, the truth is, women go through that as well. And there's really no statistics about, how many people by gender are they're there, but they're soft. But like, this is a common thing. But the idea that women don't go through that at work as well because they can just quit and stay home with the kids. Most families need 2 incomes now. Raising kids is expensive. And in fact, the problem we have in places like, say, the southern states, Eastern Kentucky is the one I'm most familiar with. The coal mines all, we don't need as much coal anymore. And so they thought, hey, we'll train women to be nurses because then the household income is the same. But, then these guys sat at home with their OxyContin prescription and ended up prescription drug addicts. It didn't solve the problem of men's identity being tied up in their jobs and people not wanting to feel like they're getting chucked in the bin of society, right? And that wasn't, hey, we prefer women. We needed nurses. So if men wanted to become nurses, they could too, right? Some of the unemployment uptick among young men, fresh college graduates, is because of AI. Because all those entry-level jobs where they were sort of clerical, you sort of did the mundane stuff, the monotonous stuff, so you learned the gig, temporarily being replaced by AI. I suspect they will go back. But a lot of it is in, computing and whatnot. Men tend to train in that more than women, right? So, I mean, here, the whole tariff war is slaughtering the steel and aluminum and automotive industries. Again, those are men. And it's not about the men. It's about the industry. It just happened to be that those were the things that Trump decided to just go. And I mean, why? Because he was protecting U.S. steel and U.S. manufacturing, and he wanted to give those boys good jobs. So you could say, well, that's protecting a certain type of blue-collar man. But you wouldn't consider that protection, would you? You'd consider that opportunity. And that language is very, very, very important. We have to be careful that the focus on protection does not get us in that pit of benevolent sexism, because that protection isn't really good for anybody. It's certainly not good for women. We know that because of the, economic abuse is a big part of the cycle of domestic violence, that men control, the spending, control her access to money. And if he's working and she's not, there's no financial independence there. And financial independence and domestic violence, there is a relationship there. And so I think we have to stop thinking about it as protection and start thinking about more what we nurture. I think we should nurture certain things in women that we don't right now. We think we do, but we don't. Somebody said to me last week that, men are not rewarded for weakness the way women are. And harsh, but in that case, I saw the point, because I see what happens when I don't behave like a good and proper victim, right? I get in the bin of doesn't deserve protection. Fuck her. And yeah, I think we should, and obviously this did not happen when I was growing up at Jane and Finch in an Afro-Caribbean community, right? This is a white person thing, because Latinas, strong women, right? Black ladies, strong women. You do not mess with Jamaican mama. But, there's a strong woman trap there, that if you do get abused, if you do get victimized, you're afraid to tell anyone, because then you're not strong anymore, right? And that's bullshit. That's just bullshit. And so, this stuff, we need to rebalance all of it. And it's about nurture, we should be nurturing more ambitious, shall we say, somewhat competitive instincts in women. We've done that to some degree, hence the better grades in school, right? But we also need to nurture those gentler interpersonal feelings skills, the emotional intelligence of boys. Right now, we're not just nurturing it, we are actively stamping it out in the way boys are raised. And, it's interesting to see how much better boys are off when they're raised in an environment that does allow them to feel their feelings and talk about their emotions. It's night and day. These young men are fantastic that are raised in those environments. Not that there aren't super great guys who grew up rough, but you see there's like a wild animal quality that they've never felt allowed to say, I am hurting. I need a minute. I can't do this alone right now. But again, we say that as protection. It's not. It's nurturing. It's support. And yes, on that, I suspect that if you brought it that way, that men are not supported this way emotionally growing up, even by their mothers, women do it too to boys. But I think you get a lot more agreement. You wouldn't get that immediate from women, because, even experts I talk to who work with men, they are specialists in men's mental health. They advocate for men. They will say, yes, men are more likely to be, the victims of violent crime, all that stuff, but it's not women doing it. Stop blaming women. Stop resenting women. Because that's still focusing on women. And we need to put the attention onto all men and boys, but especially those ones who are still developing. If we can get them through their teenage years, and then workplaces do have to become less abusive, but I can talk about that another time. But yeah, there's something we can do. I want to stop fighting over language. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. Please like and subscribe to this channel, and if you'd like to sign up for a Leanna Care session yourself, the link is in the description box below. Thanks for watching Manly Mondays.